Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fih kama yuhibbu rabbuna wa yarda. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad amma ba'd. Welcome back everyone. Welcome to meeting 4 of our error analysis course. It's nice to see you again everyone. In the previous session, in the previous meeting, we already explored tense errors, right? And learned how verb forms change depending on time expression. So the time expressions such as yesterday, last week, or since, all of those time expressions are influential to in the change of the verb forms. We also discussed how these errors are not random, right? But often reveal patterns in how learners understand English grammar. So inshallah, in this session, in this meeting 4, we will examine another very common type of grammatical error in English. That is subject-verb agreement. So subject-verb agreement errors happen, when the verb form doesn't match the subject of the sentence. Although this rule may seem simple, it is one of the most frequent errors made by English learners everywhere, not only in Indonesia. So in this session, we will analyze several examples together and practice identifying and correcting these errors. In English grammar, verbs must agree with their subject, right? This means the verb form changes depending on whether the subject is singular or plural. Okay. For example, when the subject is singular, such as she, he, or he, so the verb usually takes an S ending in the present tense. On the other hand, when the subject is plural, the verb typically stays in its base form. Although this rule seems straightforward, many learners overlook these small changes. As a result, subject-verb agreement errors frequently appear in both speaking and writing activity. Let's look at some examples of subject-verb agreement errors. In these sentences, the verbs do not match the subject correctly, right? Okay, for instance, when the subject is singular, the verb should usually include an S ending, but that ending is missing in these examples. Errors like this often happen because learners focus on the meaning of the sentence and forget to adjust the verb form. Even though the meaning may still be understandable, the grammar is not accurate. Okay. So why do learners make these kinds of errors? One of the major reasons is language transfer from their first language. In Indonesian language, in Bahasa Indonesia, for example, verbs usually do not change depending on the subject. Because of this difference, learners sometimes apply the same pattern when speaking or writing in English. Another reason is overgeneralization. This is another reason. When learners apply a rule too broadly. And finally, sometimes these errors occur simply because learners do not notice small grammatical endings like S endings. Alright, to help you remember this rule, keep a simple guideline in mind. Okay. When subject is singular, the verb in the present tense usually takes an S ending. For example, he works, for example, right? She writes, okay. And however, when the subject is plural, the verb stays in its basic form, such as they worked, students write, okay? These are the examples. Although this rule may look simple, paying attention to these small details is essential for grammatical accuracy. Now let's practice identifying and correcting subject-verb agreement errors. So on this slide you will see 5 sentences. Each sentence contains an agreement error. So your task is to read each sentence carefully and correct the verb so that it agrees with the subject. Take your time and think about whether the subject is singular or plural. Pause the video now and write your corrections before continuing to the next slide, okay? Let's review the correct answers. In these examples, notice how the verb form, you see, okay? The form of the verb changes depending on whether the subject is singular or plural. Singular subject require verbs ending with S, okay? While plural subject use the base form of the verb. Recognizing these patterns will help you identify and correct agreement errors more easily, okay? All right. At this point, it is useful to reflect on your own language patterns. When you write or when you speak in English, do you often forget to add the S ending to verbs with singular subject? Or do you sometimes confuse singular and plural forms, Identifying your personal error patterns is a key part of error analysis. When you understand your own tendency, it becomes easier to improve your accuracy, okay? All right, now let's test your understanding. On this slide, you will see not 15 sentences. Before I made 15 sentences, but now I just I have changed into only 10 sentences, okay, to make you easier to identify. So each sentence contains a subject-verb agreement error, okay, in each sentence. Your task is to read each sentence carefully and correct the verb so that it matches the subject, okay? Please pay close attention to the number of the subject, okay? Please pay close attention to the number of the subject, whether it is singular or plural. And also, notice special expressions such as everyone, each, or one of the students, which often cause agreement errors, okay? So now pause the video and take a few minutes to correct the sentences. After completing your answers, please send them to me, okay? Okay, please send them to me by the deadline that I have posted on our class group communication platform, okay? There is the evaluation page that I'm making for you for your today's score. Well, everyone, in today's meeting, we explored subject-verb agreement errors, okay, one of the most common grammatical challenges for English learners, okay. We discussed why these errors occur, examined several examples, and practiced correcting sentences together. Remember that the goal of error analysis is not only to correct mistakes, okay, but also to understand the patterns behind them. Inshallah, in our next meeting, we will analyze another important area of grammar, that is articles, inshallah, including the use of article a, article an, and article the, inshallah. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to continuing our learning journey in the next session. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.